I'm Stephanie Cole, 28, the Chief Executive Officer of Cole Dynamics, a tech startup I built from nothing after aging out of foster care at 18. The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the country club, crystal fragments catching the afternoon light like scattered diamonds. I didn't flinch as the amber liquid splashed across my Louboutin heels. I'd learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. Well, Uncle Richard's voice dripped with the same condescension I remembered from childhood, though his face had grown jollier, his hairline more generous in its retreat. If it isn't little Stephanie, playing dress-up in her fancy clothes. The engagement party chatter around us seemed to dim, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. I could smell his cologne, the same overpowering musk he'd worn when he'd visit the group home, pretending to care about his dead brother's orphaned daughter just long enough to maintain appearances with the social workers. Uncle Richard. I kept my voice level, professional. The same tone I used in boardrooms when investors tried to intimidate me. I didn't expect to see you here. He laughed, that harsh bark that used to make me hide under my thin foster care blanket. Oh, I wouldn't miss this circus for the world. When I heard through the grapevine that some poor fool was actually going to marry you. He shook his head, eyes gleaming with malicious amusement. I had to see it with my own eyes. The weight of his stare felt familiar, like being examined under a microscope, found wanting, and dismissed. Around us, the elegant crowd of Manhattan's elite continued their conversations, oblivious to the poison seeping through their perfect afternoon. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over designer gowns and tailored suits, while servers glided between guests offering canapés on silver trays. You clean up nice, I'll give you that, he continued, circling me like a predator. But we both know what you really are underneath all that expensive polish, don't we? My fingers tightened around my clutch, nails digging into the Italian leather. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the manicured gardens where other guests mingled, their laughter floating in on the spring breeze. Everything looked so perfect, so civilized. If only they knew the ugliness that could lurk beneath polished surfaces. I know exactly what I am, I said quietly. A woman who built something from nothing. Built. His eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. Is that what we're calling it? Because last I checked, little orphan girls don't just magically become CEOs. Makes a man wonder what you had to do to get where you are. The implication hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the same suffocating feeling I'd had at 12 when he'd told the social worker I was difficult and probably better off in the system. The same feeling at 16 when he'd laughed at my college acceptance letter, saying no scholarship would waste money on damaged goods. Stephanie. A warm hand touched my shoulder, and I turned to see Marcus approaching, his dark eyes immediately assessing the situation. My fiancé moved with the quiet confidence of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world, never had to fight for scraps of dignity. Everything all right? Marcus, meet my uncle, Richard Cole. I watched Richard's face carefully as I made the introduction. Uncle Richard, this is Marcus Blackwood. I saw the exact moment recognition hit. Richard's complexion went ashen as he took in Marcus's face, a face that had graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune, a face that belonged to one of the most powerful men in New York's financial district. Blackwood, Richard stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. As in Blackwood Holdings? Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He'd built an empire by reading people, and I could see him cataloging every micro-expression on my uncle's face. That's right. And you're Stephanie's family. The word family seemed to stick in the air, heavy with irony. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, his earlier confidence crumbling as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. I had no idea. Richard's voice had lost all its earlier venom, replaced by something that sounded almost like panic. No, I said softly, you didn't. The silence stretched between us, filled with the distant sound of clinking glasses and polite conversation. I could smell the gardenias from the centerpieces, their sweet fragrance a stark contrast to the bitter taste of old wounds being reopened. Marcus's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Stephanie's told me so much about her childhood," he said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make Richard shift uncomfortably. "About how supportive her family was during those difficult years." Richard's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Sweat had begun to bead on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Well, you know how it is with family. Sometimes we don't always see eye to eye." Marcus's noncommittal response somehow managed to convey volumes. I watched my uncle squirm, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. This was the man who had haunted my nightmares, who had made me believe I was worthless, unlovable. Now he stood before me, diminished and desperate, trying to backpedal from decades of cruelty. "Actually," Richard said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace, "I should probably find my wife. She'll be wondering where I've gotten to." He started to turn away, then paused, looking back at me with something that might have been regret, or might have been calculation. "Stephanie, perhaps we could talk sometime. Catch up properly." Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught our attention. The crowd was parting, whispers rippling through the room like wildfire. A woman in an elegant black dress was making her way toward us, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her bearing regal despite her age. Marcus's hand tightened on mine. "What's she doing here?" I followed his gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. The woman approaching us with measured steps and calculating eyes was someone I'd hoped never to see again, someone whose very presence threatened to unravel everything I'd built. But how had she found me? The woman's heels clicked against the marble with the precision of a metronome, each step echoing through the suddenly hushed room. I could taste copper in my mouth. I'd bitten my tongue without realizing it. The scent of her perfume reached me before she did. Chanel No. 5, the same fragrance that had clung to the cashmere coat she'd worn the last time I saw her, 15 years ago. "Hello, Stephanie." Her voice was silk wrapped around steel, cultured and cold. "You look prosperous." Margaret Whitmore. The woman who had destroyed my first foster family. The woman who had made sure I understood exactly how disposable I was. She stood before me now, immaculate as always, her pale blue eyes scanning me like a jeweler appraising a stone of questionable value. "Mrs. Whitmore." I kept my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "This is unexpected." Uncle Richard had gone completely silent, his earlier discomfort nothing compared to the tension that now crackled through the air. Even he seemed to sense that something far more dangerous than family drama was unfolding. "I imagine it is." Margaret's smile was razor-thin. "When I read about your engagement in the Times, I simply had to come and offer my congratulations. After all, we have such history together." Marcus stepped closer to me, his presence both comforting and protective. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Margaret Whitmore," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I knew Stephanie when she was just a child. I was instrumental in her development during some very formative years." The euphemism made my stomach churn. Instrumental in my development. What a delicate way to describe systematically destroying a 12-year-old's sense of self-worth. "How wonderful that you've stayed in touch," Marcus said, though I could hear the question in his voice. I'd never mentioned Margaret to him, never spoken about those particular months that had nearly broken me completely. "Oh, we haven't," Margaret replied, her eyes never leaving my face. "In fact, this is the first time I've seen dear Stephanie since she was, 13? Such a troubled child back then. So many behavioral issues." The lie slid off her tongue as smoothly as honey, but I could see the calculation behind it. She was testing me, seeing how much of the truth I'd shared with Marcus, how much ammunition she had to work with. "People change," I said carefully. "Do they?" Margaret tilted her head, studying me with the same clinical detachment I remembered. "I've always believed that our fundamental nature reveals itself eventually, no matter how well we learn to perform." The word perform hit like a physical blow. She was referencing the acting classes she'd forced me to take, the endless hours of coaching me to be the perfect daughter for prospective adoptive families, only to sabotage every placement at the last moment with carefully crafted lies about my instability. Around us, the party continued, but I felt isolated in this bubble of tension, as if the three of us existed in a separate reality from the champagne and laughter surrounding us. The afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed harsher now, casting sharp shadows across Margaret's angular face. "Stephanie has built an incredible company," Marcus said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "Coal Dynamics is revolutionizing data security. She's brilliant." "Oh, I'm sure she is." Margaret's tone suggested she found this amusing rather than impressive. Stephanie always was resourceful, very good at finding ways to get what she wanted. The implication was clear, and I saw Marcus's jaw tighten as he caught it. Margaret was painting me as manipulative, calculating, someone who used people to climb her way to success. "If you'll excuse us," I said, taking Marcus's arm, "we should rejoin our guests." "Of course." Margaret stepped aside gracefully, but her smile held a predatory quality. "I do hope we'll have a chance to chat more privately before I leave. There's so much to catch up on." As we walked away, I could feel her eyes boring into my back. My legs felt unsteady, and I was grateful for Marcus's solid presence beside me. We made it halfway across the room before he spoke. "Who is she really?" His voice was low, meant only for me. I glanced around, making sure we were out of earshot. "Someone from my past. Someone I hoped I'd never see again. Stephanie." He stopped walking, turning to face me fully. "What aren't you telling me?" Before I could answer, a server approached with a silver tray. "Champagne." "Thank you." I took a glass, needing something to do with my hands. The crystal felt fragile between my fingers, and I had to resist the urge to squeeze until it shattered. "She knows something," Marcus said quietly. "Something she thinks she can use against you." He was right, of course. Marcus hadn't built his empire by missing subtle threats. Margaret wouldn't have come here just to reminisce about old times. She wanted something, and she was prepared to destroy me to get it. "The Hartwell adoption," I said finally, the words feeling like glass in my throat. "When I was 12, there was a family, the Hartwells. They wanted to adopt me." Margaret was the social worker assigned to my case. Marcus waited, patient but alert. "They were perfect," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "Kind, wealthy, stable. They had a daughter my age who was excited about having a sister. For 3 months, I lived with them. I thought I finally had a real family." The memory was still sharp after all these years. The yellow bedroom with its window seat overlooking the garden, Mrs. Hartwell teaching me to braid my hair, Mr. Hartwell helping me with homework at the kitchen table. For the first time in my life, I'd felt safe, wanted, loved. What happened? Margaret happened. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. She told them I was dangerous, that I'd hurt their biological daughter. She fabricated incidents, twisted innocent interactions into evidence of psychological instability. She made them afraid of me. Marcus's expression darkened. "That's illegal? Unethical?" "Yes." I took a sip of champagne, but it tasted like ash. But she was very good at her job. Very convincing. The Hartwells sent me back to the group home within a week. Why would she do that? That was the question that had haunted me for years. I never knew for certain. But I found out later that Margaret had a side business. She was taking payments from certain clients who preferred to adopt infants rather than older children. My successful placement would have meant one less infant available for her paying customers. The words hung between us like a confession. I'd never spoken about this to anyone, never even allowed myself to think about it in such clear terms. But seeing Margaret again had brought it all rushing back. The betrayal, the helplessness, the crushing realization that even the people meant to protect me could be bought. "Jesus, Stephanie." Marcus's hand found mine, his thumb tracing gentle circles across my knuckles. "I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago. But she's here now." "Why?" Before I could answer, I caught sight of Margaret across the room. She was talking to someone, a man in an expensive suit whose back was turned to me. Something about his posture seemed familiar, and when he turned slightly, I caught a glimpse of his profile. My blood turned to ice. It was James Morrison, the investigative journalist who'd been sniffing around Coal Dynamics for months, looking for dirt on my past. The same journalist who'd been asking questions about my background, my rise to success, the gaps in my official biography. Margaret caught my eye across the room and smiled, raising her champagne glass in a mock toast. The message was clear. She hadn't come here alone, and she hadn't come unprepared. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. The garden maze. 5 minutes. Come alone, or tomorrow's headlines will be very interesting." The phone felt like it was burning in my hand. Around us, the party continued its elegant dance, guests laughing, glasses clinking, the string quartet playing something soft and romantic from the corner. But all I could hear was the thundering of my own heartbeat. "Stephanie." Marcus's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What is it?" I looked up at him, this man who'd chosen me, who'd seen something worth loving in the broken girl I'd once been. His dark eyes were filled with concern, and I realized that in a few minutes, everything between us might change forever. "I have to go handle something," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Business call." It wasn't entirely a lie. This was business, the business of survival, of protecting everything I'd built from the ashes of my childhood. "Now?" At our engagement party. Marcus frowned, his hand tightening on mine. "Can it wait?" "I'm afraid not." I leaned up and kissed his cheek, breathing in his familiar scent of cedar and bergamot. It might be the last time I could do so without seeing disappointment in his eyes. "I'll be right back. 10 minutes, I promise." Before he could protest further, I slipped away, weaving through the crowd toward the French doors that led to the gardens. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant lower, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. The garden maze was at the far end of the property, a Victorian-era addition that the country club maintained as a charming anachronism. As I walked, my heels sinking slightly into the soft grass, I tried to prepare myself for whatever Margaret had planned. She'd always been methodical, patient. She wouldn't have waited 15 years just to destroy me on a whim. This was calculated, purposeful. The maze entrance loomed before me, its tall hedges creating a green tunnel that seemed to swallow the afternoon light. I could smell the earthy scent of boxwood and the faint sweetness of hidden roses. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the splash of the fountain at the maze's center. I found Margaret waiting for me in the first clearing, standing beside a stone bench, like she was posing for a garden party photograph. She'd removed her jacket, and I could see the thin gold chain around her neck, the same one she'd worn all those years ago, the one that had caught the light when she'd leaned over my bed in the group home to deliver her poison. "Punctual as always," she said without turning around. "I always appreciated that about you, Stephanie. Even as a child, you understood the importance of compliance." "What do you want, Margaret?" She turned then, her pale eyes reflecting the dappled sunlight filtering through the hedge walls.
"Direct."
"I like that too. Very well. I want what I've always wanted. What's best for everyone involved." "And what would that be?" "For you to disappear. Again." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm not 12 anymore. You can't just ship me off to another group home." "No," she agreed, "but I can do something much more effective. I can tell the truth." She reached into her purse and withdrew a manila folder, thick with documents. "Do you know what's in here, Stephanie?" I didn't answer, but my silence was response enough. Medical records. Psychological evaluations. Incident reports from 3 different foster homes. She opened the folder, revealing pages of official-looking documents, all documenting a very troubled young woman with severe behavioral issues, violent tendencies, and a remarkable talent for manipulation. My mouth went dry. Those records were sealed. Juvenile files are sealed from the general public, yes, but not from someone with the right connections, the right motivation. Margaret's smile was triumphant. Amazing what people will do for the right price, isn't it? I stared at the papers in her hands, recognizing some of the letterheads even from this distance. She had everything. Every lie she'd told, every false report she'd filed, every carefully constructed narrative that had painted me as dangerous, unstable, unworthy of love. Of course, she continued conversationally, these records tell a very specific story. They paint a picture of someone who would do anything, absolutely anything, to escape her circumstances. Someone who might even be capable of eliminating obstacles to her success. The implication hung in the air like a noose. She wasn't just threatening to expose my past, she was threatening to frame me for something far worse. "You're insane," I whispered. "Am I?" "Think about it, Stephanie. A troubled foster child with documented violent tendencies suddenly becomes a successful CEO? Marries into one of New York's most powerful families? It's quite a fairy tale. Almost too good to be true." She closed the folder with a soft snap. People love a good scandal, especially when it involves the wealthy and powerful. And when that scandal suggests that someone might have removed certain obstacles along the way. She shrugged elegantly. "Well, let's just say that Mr. Morrison is very interested in exploring that angle." My legs felt weak, and I sank onto the stone bench. The cold seeped through my dress, grounding me in a moment. "What do you want?" "I want you to call off this engagement. Quietly, gracefully. Cite irreconcilable differences, cold feet, whatever you like. Then I want you to sell your company and disappear. Start over somewhere else, under a different name if necessary. And if I don't..." Margaret's smile was razor-sharp. "Then tomorrow morning, the New York Post will run a very interesting story about the mysterious past of tech CEO Stephanie Cole, complete with leaked documents suggesting that her rise to power might not have been as clean as it appears." The fountain at the center of the maze seemed louder now, its splashing echoing off the hedge walls like applause. Or like the sound of everything I'd built crashing down around me. "You have 24 hours, Margaret said, tucking the folder back into her purse. "I suggest you use them wisely." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Stephanie? Don't even think about trying to discredit me. I've been very careful to ensure that if anything happens to me, these documents will be released automatically. Insurance, you might say." As her footsteps faded away, I sat alone in the maze, surrounded by walls of green that suddenly felt more like a prison than a garden. The late afternoon sun was casting longer shadows now, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sounds of the party continuing. My engagement party, celebrating a future that might not exist by tomorrow. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, staring at Marcus's contact information. How could I explain this to him? How could I tell the man I loved that everything he thought he knew about me was built on lies and carefully buried secrets? But as I sat there, something else began to stir beneath the fear and despair. Something harder, more dangerous. Margaret had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was still the helpless 12-year-old she'd once controlled. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Marcus's name flashed on the screen, but when I answered, it wasn't his voice I heard. "Miss Cole." The voice was unfamiliar, professional, urgent. "This is Detective Sarah Chin with the NYPD. I'm calling about Marcus Blackwood. There's been an accident." The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the stone bench. For a moment, the world went completely silent. No fountain, no distant party sounds, no rustling leaves. Just the terrible echo of those words, "There's been an accident." I scrambled to retrieve the phone, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip it. "Detective? Detective, are you there?" "Yes, Miss Cole. I need you to come to Mount Sinai Hospital immediately. Mr. Blackwood was involved in a car accident about 20 minutes ago." "Is he..." The words stuck in my throat like broken glass. "Is he alive?" "He's in surgery. That's all I can tell you right now." The maze walls seemed to tilt around me, the carefully manicured hedges blurring into green smears. 20 minutes ago. That was right after I'd left him at the party, right after I'd walked away to meet Margaret. While I was sitting here listening to threats about my past, Marcus had been. Miss Cole? Are you there?
Yes.
Yes, I'm coming. I stood on unsteady legs, my designer heels suddenly feeling like stilts. Which entrance should I? Emergency room. Ask for me when you arrive. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. An accident. A coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. But even as I thought it, I knew better. Margaret's timing had been too perfect, her confidence too absolute. She'd known something was going to happen to Marcus. She'd planned it. I ran through the maze, my heels catching on loose stones, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The hedge walls blurred past me as I took turn after turn, muscle memory guiding me toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear the party continuing, oblivious to the fact that their host was lying on an operating table. When I finally burst out of the maze, I could see the country club in the distance, its windows glowing warmly in the late afternoon sun. Everything looked exactly the same as when I'd left it, but the world had fundamentally shifted. The elegant guests were still mingling on the terrace, still laughing and drinking champagne, still celebrating an engagement that might now be meaningless. I pulled out my phone and called for a car, pacing back and forth on the gravel path while I waited. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the timeline. Margaret had insisted I come alone to the maze. She'd kept me there for exactly the right amount of time. And now Marcus was. Stephanie. I turned to see Uncle Richard hurrying toward me, his face flushed with exertion and something that looked like panic. Stephanie, thank God. I've been looking everywhere for you. Not now, Richard. I didn't have time for whatever game he was playing. You don't understand. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. I heard about Marcus. The accident. But Stephanie, it wasn't an accident. I went very still. What did you say? I saw her, he whispered, glancing around nervously. Margaret. She was on the phone right before you went to meet her. I heard her say now and then something about the intersection of 5th and 82nd. The intersection where Marcus would have been driving to get back to his office. The intersection where his accident had happened. Why are you telling me this? I asked, studying his face carefully. Uncle Richard had never done anything that didn't benefit him directly. Because. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Because she approached me earlier.
Before the party.
She offered me money, a lot of money, to help her destroy you. My blood turned to ice. And I said yes. The admission came out in a rush. God help me, Stephanie, I said yes. I was supposed to create a distraction, keep Marcus busy while she handled you. But I never imagined she'd actually hurt him. A black sedan pulled up to the curb, and I could see my driver through the windshield. I had to get to the hospital, had to see Marcus, had to know if he was going to be okay. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. What did she want you to do? Make a scene. Get Marcus angry. Maybe even get him to leave early. She said she just wanted to talk to you privately, settle some old business. Richard's hands were shaking now. She never said anything about this. I believed him. Richard was many things, cruel, selfish, petty, but he wasn't a killer. He was just a small man who'd been offered money to hurt someone he'd always resented. Margaret had used him the same way she'd used everyone else, as a tool to be discarded when no longer useful. Where is she now? I don't know. She left right after you went to the maze. Just disappeared. The driver was getting impatient, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. I had to go. But as I reached for the car door, Richard grabbed my arm again. Stephanie, I'm sorry. For everything. For what I said when you were a kid. For what I did today. I know it doesn't matter now, but... You're right, I said quietly. It doesn't matter now. I got into the car and gave the driver the hospital address, watching through the rear window as Richard stood alone on the gravel path, looking smaller and more pathetic than I'd ever seen him. The drive to Mount Sinai felt endless. Traffic crawled through the city streets, and every red light felt like a personal insult. I tried calling the hospital, but they wouldn't give me any information over the phone. I tried calling Marcus's assistant, his business partner, anyone who might have more details about what had happened. No one knew anything. As we finally pulled up to the hospital, I could see news vans already gathering in the parking lot. Word had gotten out that Marcus Blackwood had been in an accident, and the vultures were circling. I pulled my jacket up over my head and hurried through the emergency room entrance, hoping to avoid the cameras. "I'm looking for Detective Chun," I told the receptionist. "About Marcus Blackwood." "One moment." She picked up the phone, spoke quietly, then hung up. "She'll be right down." I paced the waiting room, my heels clicking against the linoleum floor. The smell of disinfectant and fear hung heavy in the air, and I could hear the distant sounds of medical equipment beeping and humming. Somewhere in this building, Marcus was fighting for his life because of me. Because of my past, my secrets, my inability to escape the shadows that had followed me since childhood. "Miss Cole." I turned to see a woman in her 40s approaching, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her badge clipped to her jacket pocket. Detective Chin looked tired, like she'd been dealing with cases like this for too long. "How is he?" I asked immediately. "Still in surgery. The doctors say the next few hours are critical." She gestured toward a quieter corner of the waiting room. "Can we talk?" We sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, and Detective Chin pulled out a small notebook. "I need to ask you some questions about this afternoon. When was the last time you saw Mr. Blackwood?" "At our engagement party. Around 3:30, maybe 4 o'clock. "And where did you go after that?" I hesitated. How much should I tell her? How much could I tell her without implicating myself in something I didn't fully understand yet? I had to step away to handle a business matter. A phone call. Can anyone verify that? Margaret could, but somehow I doubted she'd be willing to provide an alibi. There might be security cameras at the country club. I went to the garden maze to take the call privately. Detective Chun made a note. The accident happened at 4:15 p.m. at the intersection of 5th Avenue and 82nd Street. Mr. Blackwood's car was struck by a delivery truck that ran a red light. The truck driver claims his brakes failed. Claims? We're having the vehicle inspected, but preliminary examination suggests the brake lines may have been tampered with. So, it was definitely attempted murder. Margaret hadn't just threatened me. She'd actually tried to kill the man I loved to prove how serious she was. "Detective," I said carefully, "I think someone may have targeted Marcus because of me." Chen's eyebrows rose. "What makes you say that?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown number again. I told you that you had 24 hours. Marcus's accident was just a preview of what happens when you don't listen. A call off the engagement and disappear, or next time I won't miss. M." I stared at the message, my hands trembling with rage rather than fear now. Margaret had crossed a line. She'd moved from threatening me to actually hurting someone I loved. That changed everything. "Miss Cole." Detective Chun was watching me carefully. "What is it?" I made a decision that would either save everything or destroy it completely. I handed her my phone. "I think you need to see this." Chun read the message, her expression growing darker with each word. "Who sent this?" "A woman named Margaret Whitmore. She was my social worker when I was in foster care. She's been blackmailing me." "Blackmailing you how?" I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment when I either trusted someone with the truth or lost everything trying to protect secrets that were already being used against me. "She has falsified records from my childhood. Documents that make me look dangerous, unstable. She's threatening to release them to the press unless I disappear." "And you think she orchestrated Mr. Blackwood's accident?" "I know she did." I told her about the conversation with Uncle Richard, about Margaret's perfectly timed demands, about the journalist she'd been talking to at the party. Detective Chin listened without interruption, taking notes in her careful handwriting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Miss Cole, these are very serious allegations. If what you're saying is true, we're talking about attempted murder, extortion, conspiracy." "I know. I'm going to need you to come to the station and make a formal statement. And I'll need copies of any communications you've had with this Margaret Whitmore." "Of course. But first..." I looked toward the elevator that led to the surgical floors. "Can I see him? When he gets out of surgery?" "Family only, I'm afraid." I'm his fiancé. Chen's expression softened slightly. I'll see what I can do. A doctor in surgical scrubs emerged from the elevator, looking around the waiting room. Family of Marcus Blackwood? I stood so quickly I nearly knocked over my chair. I'm his fiancé. The doctor approached, pulling off his surgical cap. He looked exhausted but not devastated, which I took as a good sign. Mr. Blackwood is stable, he said, and I felt my knees nearly buckle with relief. He has a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, and a fractured collarbone, but no internal bleeding. He's very lucky. Can I see him? He's being moved to recovery now. He'll be unconscious for several more hours, but you can sit with him if you'd like. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Marcus was alive. Hurt, but alive. Miss Cole, Detective Chen said as I started to follow the doctor. We'll need to talk more tomorrow. And in the meantime, I'd suggest you be very careful. If this woman is as dangerous as you say, I will be. But even as I said it, I was already planning. Margaret thought she held all the cards, thought she could manipulate me the way she had when I was 12. She was about to learn that the scared little girl she'd once controlled had grown into someone much more dangerous. As I rode the elevator up to Marcus's room, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. James Morrison, the investigative journalist. The same man Margaret had been talking to at the party. It was time to turn the tables. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped into the quiet hallway of the recovery ward. Through a window, I could see Marcus lying unconscious in a hospital bed, machines monitoring his vital signs, bandages covering the visible injuries. He looked so still, so vulnerable. This strong, confident man who'd built an empire and chosen to love me despite all my baggage, reduced to this because of my past. I pressed my hand against the window and made a silent promise. Margaret Whitmore had made the mistake of thinking I was still the powerless child she'd once known. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. My phone buzzed with another message, but this time it wasn't from Margaret. It was from an unknown number, but the message made my blood run cold. Stephanie Cole is not who she claims to be. Tomorrow's story will reveal the truth about the woman Marcus Blackwood almost married. Some secrets are too dangerous to stay buried. J. Morrison. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Margaret hadn't just threatened me, she'd already set her plan in motion. The story was going to run whether I complied with her demands or not. But as I looked through the window at Marcus, something crystallized in my mind. I was done running for my past. Done letting other people control my narrative. Margaret Whitmore had taught me one valuable lesson all those years ago. Sometimes the only way to survive is to become more ruthless than your enemies. It was time to put that lesson to use. I walked into Marcus's room, pulled a chair up beside his bed, and began making phone calls. By morning, Margaret would discover that the scared little girl she'd once terrorized had grown into someone who knew how to fight back. And this time I wasn't going to lose.